I declare war. This video is in response to a video that this little Sambo, this damn slave catcher named David Carroll did. The name of his video is Remembering Selma for What? This video was full of so much BS and nonsense that it's really difficult to figure out where to begin my response. This guy is a sadistic slave catcher who enjoys inflicting pain on his own people with the words that come from his mouth. This man has no love for black people. He has nothing but contempt for black people. And he expresses that contempt, that hatred at every opportunity that presents itself. Anytime there's a black event of significance to the black community, here comes that tap dancing, boot licking, butt kissing Uncle Tom, putting on his Uncle Ruckus show to entertain his white subscribers. And, many people just don't understand, but most of this guy's subscribers are white people. And many of them are posers. They pose as black people. But when you go to their page, you can tell by their content that they are white and that they are conservative. In fact, outright racists support this guy and comment on his videos. And, that should be disturbing to anyone with intelligence, anyone with common sense. But enough of the ad hominems and, personal attacks. I'm going to get to the substance of the points that he raised in his video. The first point that this damn sellout made was this. He said that Martin Luther King was a coon and a sellout. And he talked about how King participated in the second march on Selma and then decided to halt the march. And he basically said that King was persuaded by members of Congress to halt the march. And he said that King was a sellout for doing so and that people condemned him for being a sellout, labeled him as a sellout. But when you look at the history, it goes a little deeper than that, far deeper. First of all, there was a federal order in place that prohibited the protesters from engaging in a demonstration at that time. And as we all know, during Bloody Sunday, the protesters were brutally beaten by the police. John Lewis talks about how he was knocked unconscious during his demonstration. And many others were injured. They were gassed. They were beaten. They faced the most brutal form of oppression. So King had all this stuff in mind when he participated in the second march on Selma. There was a federal order in place prohibiting the march from going forward. And he had witnessed, he was aware of the brutality that the protesters faced during the first march. And people like the president, President Johnson, warned him, told him about the injunction and all that stuff. And King used common sense. He used reason to reach the conclusion that that second march probably wasn't a good idea, since there was a federal order in place prohibiting the march. And since he saw what kind of brutality the protesters faced during the first march, so he was intelligent enough to wait until the court allowed them to march. And after that order was issued allowing the march to go forward, that provided protection for the demonstrators. They had the protection of the federal government on their side. So the police could not attack the protesters at that point. And he was able to go forward with his march. And because of all the publicity around the march on Selma, they were able to get historic civil rights legislation passed. The Voting Rights Act passed. That's not a symbol or example of a sellout. That's an example of a strategic, practical thinking man, a real leader who produces results. What other leader can you think of that has produced such results? Helping to get historic, vital civil rights legislation passed. Anybody calling King a coon is a damn fool. This Uncle Ruckus talked about the issue of voting. Well, your black ass wouldn't be able to vote if it wasn't for Martin Luther King. And you had the audacity to call him a coon. You're the damn coon. You done lost your damn mind, man. And it's just amazing that people actually follow a fool like you. The next point that you make in your video is you talk about how African Americans are essentially dishonoring the memory of their ancestors and of the struggle by voting overwhelmingly for Democrats. And then you go into this ridiculous little rant about how the Democrats were the ones who oppressed African Americans, and how African Americans are basically voting for the same party that oppressed them and, deprived them of their basic rights. The whole Jim Crow, and how the Democrats were responsible for supporting Jim Crow and supporting the KKK and all that nonsense. Obviously, there's truth to the fact that many of the Southern leaders were Democrats. There's truth to the fact that many Democrats oppressed black people and supported segregation. That's an undeniable fact. But the problem is, your analysis is looking at the Democratic Party of yesterday, the Democratic Party of over 50 years ago. You're looking at the Republican Party from over 50 years ago. You are not analyzing the situation as it stands today. As it stands today, the Democrats are the ones pushing for reforms that benefit African Americans. Of course, the Democrats are not a perfect party. Of course, they have their flaws. Of course, there are flaws with both parties. And for that reason, I'm not a Democrat, nor am I a Republican. But I'm smart enough to know that there's a difference between the two parties. When we're talking about voting rights today. We're talking about Selma. When you look at voting rights in this country, you have to ask yourself which party is standing in the way of voting rights today. Let's not talk about 50 years ago. Let's talk about today. The chair of the House Judiciary Committee is a Republican. He is standing in the way of progress. Members of Congress have proposed a Voting Rights Amendment Act to correct the disastrous decision of the Supreme Court in the Shelby County versus Holder decision. But it's the Republicans that are standing in the way of that proposed legislation. It's not the Democrats doing that. It's the Republicans doing that. It is the Republican members of the Supreme Court who voted to gut the Voting Rights Act, to strip it of the key provisions of Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. That's your Republican Party that did that. The party that you want people to support without providing any kind of explanation or justification for such support. See, African Americans vote for Democrats for a reason. When you look at the two-party system, there's one party that's standing in the way of progress today, and there's another party that is trying to make some reforms. It's the Republican Party, again, standing in the way of voting rights in this country. There were Republican attorney generals who supported gutting Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. Republicans did that. So there's a reason why African Americans support Democrats far more than they support Republicans. It's Republicans who are attacking affirmative action, a program designed to increase educational opportunities for African Americans. That's the Republicans attacking that. So again, there is a reason why African Americans vote overwhelmingly for Democrats right now. And we have to understand, when you talk all this garbage about what the Democrats did in the past, we have to understand that many of those Democrats that you are speaking ill of, many of them became Republicans as a result of the Republican Party's Southern strategy, where they deliberately pandered to white races. They pandered to their fears, their prejudice, and their hatred in order to get votes, in order to get people to switch their party from Democrat to Republican. And many of them did that. Staunch segregationists like Strom Thurmond joined the Republican Party, and many other races joined the Republican Party as a result of the Southern strategy. And this strategy is not a fantasy. This is a reality. Lee Atwater gave an interview where he outlined that strategy. And for those who have time, I will include a link in the description box to this video so you can hear about this Southern strategy. But see, people like that Sambo, that damn slave catcher, David Carroll, they don't want to tell you the full story. They only want to give you bits and pieces. So you will end up supporting a party who has done absolutely nothing for you in modern times. So I'm going to move on to the next point that David Carroll made in this video. And that's with respect to President Obama. David Carroll went on to say that President Obama is the worst president in American history. By what standard do you label the president as the worst president in American history? You just throw out a statement like that without any kind of justification or any kind of backup or anything to substantiate that claim, and yet these fools eat it up. You said that Obama has done nothing for black people. But before I go on to that point, I'm just going to go back to your point about the worst president in American history. We don't even have to go back that far to prove that claim to be utterly and completely false. The president before President Obama was much worse. And the president I'm referring to is George W. Bush. The economy was destroyed when that man left his office. The economy was in shambles. Unemployment was at high numbers. On that man's watch, one of the greatest intelligent failures in history occurred when terrorists knocked down the World Trade Center towers. That was a colossal example of failure. Failure in leadership. Failure to do what presidents are supposed to do, which is to protect the American people. George W. Bush failed horribly. And no one in their right mind would say that George Bush was a more successful president than Obama. Only a damn blind idiot would say such a thing. And not only that, that man sent Americans to Iraq to fight a war on false pretenses. He told the people that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He told the people lies about how Iraq was connected to 9/11 when there is no proof whatsoever to back up that ridiculous claim. All those lives lost, billions upon billions of dollars burned and squandered, and they didn't find any weapons of mass destruction. If that is not a definition of failure, I don't know what is. And that failed, ridiculous war in Iraq has paved the way for the destruction that we see in the region. It paved the way for the creation of ISIS. If that's not failure, I don't know what is. Obama can't possibly be the worst president when his predecessor, George W. Bush, was far worse than any other president that I can remember in my lifetime. Now I'm going to move on to the last point, and that's this. You said that Obama has done nothing for black people. I hear this a lot from right-wing people like you, from the people on Fox News, and from the loony left, from those, who don't look at the facts, those who have an agenda. Now, let me be clear. Obama is not perfect. He has not done enough for black people. There's much more that should be done and could be done. But let's be clear, to say that the man has done nothing for black people is just an outright lie. An outright lie. And I'm just going to talk about the things that deal specifically with the African American community. I'm not going to go into other things that benefit African Americans along with other Americans, but I'm going to focus on matters that deal specifically with our community, the black community. Here are a few things that Obama has done. He passed an executive order, an African American higher education initiative that was designed for African Americans, to serve the interests of African Americans. President Obama has implemented the Brothers Keeper program, which was designed to benefit African American communities. And there are cities like Newark who are taking advantage of that opportunity. They are using the Brothers Keeper program to improve the condition in their communities. So this notion that Obama has done nothing for black people is absurd. Those are two obvious examples. Other examples include this. Obama's administration conducted a thorough investigation of the killing of Mike Brown and of the Ferguson Police Department. Obama sent Eric Holder to Ferguson to investigate the situation there. In their report on the Ferguson Police Department is commendable. The fact that they did a thorough investigation of that department and exposed the racism within that department, that has the potential to create fundamental change in Ferguson. That can't be swept aside. That can't be discounted as if Obama has done nothing for black people. They have conducted similar investigations around this country. They're investigating the Cleveland Police Department, from what I understand, and other police departments, to end the police misconduct, the police brutality around this country that's directed towards black people. If that's not something for black people, I don't know what is. When your party, when those Republicans were trying to gut the Voting Rights Act, it was Obama's Justice Department, his lawyers fighting to protect the Voting Rights Act. It was his Justice Department fighting voter suppression in Texas. As a result of the work of the Justice Department and other groups, courts ruled that Texas's voter ID law was discriminatory. So you can't just brush that aside and say that Obama has done nothing for black people. When affirmative action was in jeopardy, Obama and his attorneys argued in favor of affirmative action in the case of University of Texas, and in the case of Fisher versus the University of Texas. So please stop telling people lies. Quit telling people lies about how Obama's done nothing for black people. And then you mentioned that Obama hasn't attended any black functions. Anybody that has access to a computer can easily debunk that nonsense. Obama has been to meetings with the Congressional Black Caucus. He has met with civil rights organizations like the Urban League, the National Action Network, the NAACP, and other groups. So please stop with the nonsense.